In this video, I'm going to show you how I went from this dark image to this one, all in Adobe Lightroom Classic. Hello amigos, this is Pablo Garcia, the engineer photographer. Last fall, my wife and I were in the state of Maine enjoying the fall colors. And we spent a few days in beautiful Camden. Beautiful town, I highly recommend that you go there, especially in the fall. And late one day, as I was walking in the harbor, I took this photograph, sunset skies, and this beautiful building, and the nice hill and the fall colors. But this is the edited image. The original image that I took is this one, and as you can see, is pretty dark. I took this photo in RAW format, which is typically what I do, because we know that in RAW format we have more information available in the file to be able to deal with the dark shadows or sometimes the very high highlights and be able to recover some of the detail. But if you shoot JPEG, I highly recommend that you save the highest quality JPEG file that your camera allows you to save, and you may be able to also increase the shadows and salvage some of the highlights. But anyway, this time I have a RAW format. And if we look here, we have the histogram, and the histogram shows basically two areas. This first area here is going to be the dark shadows of this hill and the building, and this other area all the way to the right is gonna be the sky. Pretty much nothing in the middle. I could have increased the exposure when I took this photo, maybe half a stop, but then that would have pushed me to the edge, right, where I'll start burning the whites and the highlights. Another option would have been to take multiple exposures. And many of today's cameras allow you in the menu system to set it up so that with one click of the shutter, you can take 3 or 5 exposures, 1 or 2 stops apart. And once you come to the computer, you can blend them together. With advances in the software, that is getting a lot easier to do. It used to require that you had a tripod so that you wouldn't have any movement in the scene while taking the images, but between stabilization in the camera and the improvements on the software, you know, the auto alignment feature on the software is there, and it can handle very small changes when you take the images, you know, one after the other, one click of the shutter. In this image, as you can see, is fairly dark. So let me show you how I go about editing an image like this. The first thing I like to do is do some global adjustments, and the main global adjustments I want to do at this time is I'm going to increase the shadow, so I want to see what I have to work with, and I know that's going to give me a very flat looking, but we'll fix that. I'm going to reduce the highlights a bit on the sky, bring some detail on the sky. I'm going to increase the whites a bit and maybe play a little bit with the blacks. Anyway, this just gives me a start for me to figure out what to do. In this image, we have two main parts. We have the foreground and we have the sky. So now I'm going to concentrate on working on the foreground. And I'm going to use the mask in Lightroom. So I come to this area of masking, and it gives me the options. We have the AI-driven mask on selecting subject and sky, and the other ones that we can use with the brush and the linear grading and the real grading, for example. Now, we don't have a select foreground option, but for this image, we can select the sky and then invert it, and that will give us the portion that we want. So let's try that. So I'm going to click on select sky. That's just going to take a few seconds, depending on how fast your computer is. Mine is not very fast. And, you know, it did a very good job of selecting the sky. All I have to do now, I'm going to invert it, and now I selected basically the foreground. Now, it didn't do a perfect job. I can refine the mask a little bit. You can see the area here under these trees is selected a portion of the sky, so I can subtract with the brush, have a small brush and just click in that area, and basically we have a better looking sky. I'm gonna make the selection a little bigger, and that's gonna help select, between the branches of this tree. We can spend more time refining it, but this will be my basic approach. Now, what do I want to do to the foreground? Well, when we increased the shadows, it became a very flat looking foreground. So perhaps a little bit of contrast. I'm going to increase the exposure a bit. I'm going to reduce the blacks. That's going to give me more contrast. I'm going to increase texture. I'm going to increase clarity. That also gives it additional contrast on the midtones. And I'm going to increase the saturation. Now, it's called saturation here in these adjustments, but in reality it's vibrance. As we move to the right, you can see how it brings the colors up. So far, so good. So let's see the effect of this mask. I'm going to turn off this mask. So that was the flat looking foreground just with increasing the shadows. And now we have a much better looking foreground. I'm going to increase the contrast maybe a little bit more, reduce the blacks a little bit more, a little more texture, and I like the foreground a little more saturated. So that's it for the foreground. Lightroom did a very good job. Now, we can repeat similar steps for doing the sky. So instead of doing the sky that way, what I'm going to do is, with the recent update in Lightroom that just happened a couple days ago, Lightroom included a number of presets that use the AI-driven mask. So I'm going to go down to the presets and I'm going to scroll down to this area called Adaptive Sky. And these are the new presets that Lightroom included. And you can see the effect of the presets as I'm moving. So perhaps this one called Blue Drama looks pretty good. Then we have this one called Dark Drama. Maybe it's a little too saturated. I'm going to go with Blue Drama. When I click on that preset, Lightroom is automatically going to create a new mask. And we go here, you can see under the mask what is called Blue Drama. And it created the sky mask automatically. And it gave it some texture and some clarity on that preset, and also changed the temperature. Just like any presets, we can make any additional changes you want. So perhaps I'm going to darken it a bit. And I'm going to reduce the highlights and maybe not so much clarity. And it also applies some dehaze. I like what dehaze did. So here is the effect of that Blue Drama and the modifications that I made. So I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to turn it on again. And overall, I think we had done a pretty good job. Let's review where we are. We started with this image, and with the changes we had made, we're over here. And I think this image already looks much, much better. I'm going to close the window on the left, the panel on the left. Now, there are a couple more things I would like to do. One little trick, if you have full images and you have seen my videos, you had seen this little trick before. We can go down to the calibration panel and just increase the saturation of the blue a bit. And as you can see, that brings special pay attention to the trees. It makes them glow. Now, it saturated the sky a lot more. We can fix that. So I'm just going to increase the blue because there's actually some blue on those oranges and yellows and greens. Okay, it makes them pop even more. Now, to offset the additional saturation we did in the blue channel, we go to the HSL panel. We're going to go to saturation. I'm going to click the target adjustment, and I'm just going to click on the sky and basically desaturate the blue a bit. And that's a very targeted adjustment for the blue to offset for the additional saturation we did on the blue channel. The other thing I'm going to do, since I'm in the HSL panel, I want to add a little luminance to the reds and to the yellows and make those trees pop even more. So I'm going to turn off the adjustments we had done with the HSL panel. That's with the adjustments off. And this is with the adjustments on. Now, the changes are very subtle, right? And that's the key. You just have to make sure you're not very heavy-handed. In terms of colors, we are there. But there are some additional touches I would like to do to this image. The first two had to do with, I have this lamp right here, and it's right there in the foreground, it's right against the bottom edge of the image. It's very distracting, it doesn't add anything. So I'm gonna take the healing brush, I'm gonna make it a little bigger, and I'm just gonna get rid of it. I'm just gonna come down and let Lightroom select and some pixels from another part of the image. Now, we're there now. The next thing I'm gonna do, if I actually zoom in this location, we have a person, and I'm gonna delete him. So I'm gonna make a smaller brush, and I'm just gonna paint over this person and let Lightroom, it didn't do a good job, so I'm gonna move it. I'm gonna tell it I want to borrow from this area over here, and that's better. As you can see, you can spend a little more time refining it. I'm just doing it quickly so you can borrow from the right part of the image. What else would I like to do? If you focus on this part on the lower right, there is a little bench, and I actually like that bench there. I wish one of those lampposts was right next to the bench, giving it some light. So we can do that also with the healing brush. And the healing brush, we usually use it to remove stuff, but we can actually use it to add. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a little bigger circle, and I'm gonna put it in this area right here. I'm gonna draw down like if I were to erase something, and I'm gonna allow Lightroom to pick the area that it thinks it needs to borrow from, and it picked an area from the bench. But now I'm gonna go to that area that Lightroom selected, and I'm gonna move it and put it right over this light. And I still have the healing brush in healing. Sometimes you have to play with cloning to see what works better. But as you can see now, we added a light. So instead of using the healing brush to delete, we basically use the healing brush to borrow this lamppost, make a copy of it, and blend it into the original part of the image. Now we have the light where we want it. Now we want to give it a little more light. So I'm gonna go to the mask, and I'm gonna add with the radial gradient and put a gradient right over that light. I'm going to increase the exposure a bit. I'm gonna increase the highlights, and I'm gonna warm it up. Very subtle, so if I turn it off, pay attention to this part right here. So if I turn it off, and I turn it on. Off, on. You can see it just gave the impression that there is light coming from that lamp. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. So all I have to do is go to that radial gradient I had. I'm gonna click on it. I'm gonna duplicate it. And I'm gonna move it over here. And there we have it. Let's review what we did. So I'm gonna go back to the original image, and here is the original image. You saw it was very dark. First thing we did is we opened the shadows and made some global adjustments, and then we selected the foreground by selecting the sky and inverting it, and then doing some specific adjustments to the foreground. We then use one of the new adaptive presets and make some changes to that for the sky. And then we gave it, some additional touches on the color of the trees, on removing a couple of distractions, and the little trick I show you on using the healing brush to actually add something back into the image from another portion of the image. Well, amigos, I hope you like this quick edit of this raw file. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I please ask you to subscribe, tell a friend about the channel, send me your comments, your ideas for new episodes, and I'll leave you here with this video I did recently on how to use the straightening tool in Lightroom, and I'll see you next time.